Please take your seats as Chloe comes to read to us from Matthew's Gospel.
Good morning. So our reading today is from Matthew chapter 27, and I'll be reading verses 27 to 44. The soldiers mock Jesus. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. The crucifixion of Jesus. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross, and when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And then when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves, casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Then 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided them, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to. For he said, 'I am God's son.'" The rebels who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way.
What do we see as we gaze upon the cross of Christ? What do you see? What do I see? Of course, we see Christ, battered, bloodied and bruised, dying in agony. We see something horrific, something ugly, something that, if we are honest, we would rather shy away from. But one of the interesting things about Matthew's account is that this is not what he gives us. In Matthew's account, the spotlight is not upon Jesus at all. Apart from crying out twice, there is no description of Christ's suffering, horrific as they were. But if you read Matthew's account, Gethsemane is far more graphic in describing Christ's suffering. Instead, Matthew focuses on those who inflict Christ's suffering. And he does it in a matter-of-fact, almost dispassionate way. He describes the orgy of cruelty that was designed not just to kill, but to dehumanize its victim. From the cruel taunts to the crown of barbed wire. Of course, they used thorns, but if the Roman soldiers had access to barbed wire, you can be sure they would have preferred it. So much more damage you can do. And Matthew is keen to spread the blame. Judas betrays Peter. The other disciples, Peter, and the other disciples take flight. The chanting mob, the will of the people, drives things forward. Pilate washes his hands of him. And those who can't resist mocking just add to the cruelty. And then, of course, there are the soldiers who carry out orders with impressive enthusiasm and efficiency. And of course, all this is enabled and overseen by the empire, by the Jewish authorities, for whom it is expedient that Jesus is liquidated as a public example. All are involved. All conspire. All participate. Deicide, the murder of God. That's what Matthew sees when he looks at the cross. Humanity conspiring to get rid of God. So maybe the cross is in part a mirror. As we gaze at the cross, we're invited to look at ourselves, to recognize the ugly, ever-present current of sin within which we are willingly and unwillingly swept along. All of our unfaithfulness, our selfishness, our greed, our pride, all of the systemic sins that plague our world, that perpetrate cycles of violence and injustice and poverty, are somehow gathered up and summarized in this one act, the crucifixion of Jesus. So as we gaze at the cross, Matthew invites us to gaze into our own hearts, our own motivations, our own attitudes, to be honest about who we are. But that's not the whole story, thank God. The cross not only lays bare what is on our hearts, it lays bare the heart of God. Not only a mirror into our own hearts, but a window into the heart of God. The cross invites us to look beyond the ugliness, beyond the grotesque violence and the terror, to see God at work. To recognize that it wasn't the nails that kept Christ on the cross. It was love. It was love. The cross is not what God inflicts in order to forgive. It's what God endures as he forgives. As he faces down hate. As he drains the sting of sin. Here is love, as the hymn puts it. Here is God's love doing a beautiful thing. Brian Zahnd describes the crucifixion as having a grotesque beauty. A grotesque beauty. In the midst of the ugliness and the grotesque, here is the beauty of divine love. The beauty that saves the world. The love that reconciles us to God and to each other. The love that makes peace. The love that is not put off by the ugliness, but which reaches out into the darkness with arms outstretched to embrace us and to rescue us. Here sin is unmasked, undone, and stripped of its power. Here Christ embraces us in our sin, in our weakness, in our brokenness, in our pain, in our fear. And says to us, here is bread, my body broken for you. And here is wine, my blood poured out for you. Take and eat and drink, for you are my friends. You are forgiven and you are loved. It's truly a beautiful thing. Thanks be to God.
This reading continues in Matthew 27, from verses 45 to 54. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, this man is calling for Elijah. At once one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now, when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified. And they said, truly, this man was God's son.